Comrades, today we are going to discuss the situation in Belarus, where over 3 months now, grassroots activism has really demonstrated that people aren't happy with the current situation there. And Elena hopefully will put us all into a better position in terms of what is going on. At the end of Elena's talk, we've got a model resolution that we'd like to put to everyone and hopefully have that passed. Elena, if you want to make a start, thank you.
Thank you, comrades. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for following the situation in Belarus, and your solidarity and support is definitely felt. So today for Belarus, just a few news of the uprising of the last week. It has been over 100 days since the uprising, since the elections of the 10th of August, when people were absolutely shocked with the response when they came out to protest against elections which were neither free nor fair. It felt like going back to Auschwitz, going back to the 1939, 1937. The police violence was unprecedented, and it was all aimed at intimidating people. Well, it had the opposite effect. It really, made everyone believe that if we don't do anything, if we just pretend that nothing happens, then tomorrow will be no one else to stand in for us, because all the categories of people were affected: the workers, the students, the pensioners, the women. Everyone has been under the pressure, under the intimidation, had been arrested, had been beaten up, has been tortured. And, the protest is still growing. It hasn't been a Sunday yet without a big march, and the format of the Saturday marches has changed. Initially, it was women's marches. In a way, it's a very feminist element to this. Call it an uprising, call it a movement at all levels to actually bring democracy to Belarus, bring real power to the people. So Saturdays used to be women's marches, and Mondays are now pensioners' marches called wisdom marches, and occasionally on Friday they do the differently abled people's march. So the disabled people move in their wheelchairs or walk very slowly with support. Well, today the disabled people's march was blocked because the police blocked all ways for them to carry in the normal direction, so they had to take a different route. So today it was a very sad day for Belarus, because the whole country had to honor memory of Roman Bondarenko, a very young person, an artist, a teacher who was beaten to death and who died about a week ago. And so today there were lots of flowers, lots of people coming down to say a few words to honor his memory. There were lots of shrines organized where people are. So no one has been yet charged with his murder, but lots of people have been arrested and imprisoned, including a few of my friends and some relatives, for honoring his memory, for putting up a shrine or coming out in protest in his memory. Last Sunday, last Sunday was again an anti-record, so to speak. It was over 1,000, almost 1,500 people detained just in one day, just because they came out to protect that memorial to Roman. And so on the positive side, well, that was certainly the last drop. I mean, you can go against so many things, but going against memory of the victims, of the dead. And many people, they were thinking about things like the Holocaust, the Second World War, and in Belarus it's a particularly sensitive subject because we lost a quarter of the population in the Second World War. Many more died in the Holocaust as well. So anyway, it was another way to just remind ourselves why we're doing it, and we will have to keep on fighting, because no one wants to live in a concentration camp. because that's what it started being like. People, you know, the rule of law is completely gone. If before there was some pretense, if before workers might have had, you know, really restrictive contracts under the labor code, it's effectively semi-slave labor. They could be like fired at will, or they could be, you know, they could be fined, or their bonuses will be taken away. So they'll be still clinging on to it, thinking, well, I'm poor, but at least I'm not destitute. It's very close. You know, the line is very thin between being poor and getting a worker's salary of some $100 and, you know, losing it all, being imprisoned and having to pay the bill for being in prison. Yeah, and if not, then you are fired from whatever you worked, and then you might have to be paying extra fine as the social parasites. There was this very controversial law on social parasites. Effectively, if people are, you know, looking after a relative, or they are, could be a housewife, or they could be, I think housewives were allowed to stay at home without holding a job until the child is 3. But after that, you have to pay a fine effectively, or a tax, in other words, for not holding a job. And it's it used to be another control tool. So we had to write explanation letters, what we're doing, where we're working, and why we're not parasites. Otherwise, we would have had to pay up, even people living in Belarus or outside of Belarus. It's another hidden tax. So on the positive side, today there were new EU sanctions, something that the Belarusian diaspora were calling for. And one of the people on the sanctions list is Mikhail Orda, who is the head of the yellow unions, of the Lukashenko's trade unions. And I might have mentioned last time that Lukashenko, one of his outrageous things that he said, okay, let's organize everyone in private business in unions, meaning controlled by him. And if they don't, then we'll have to close the business and fine the business. So it's not how it works in the workers' movement. And today I was on another good call for the trade union activists. And some of them were remembering stories, one of them in the Swiss Association of Belarusians involved in the trade union movement. They said they visited a museum of concentration camps recently, and it was one very touching story. Those that still remember it, they were saying trade unions were really helping those in the camps, but people in the camps never asked for money or food or any other support for them or for those who left outside. They kept asking, send us more books. And it's very similar to the situation now, because a lot of people, like over 20,000 people were arrested in Belarus, and the prisons are full to capacity. So people are quite often arrested, and then they're let out and told to come back and finish their term end of the week. So it's very similar. When they get into prison, there's lots of people who share what they know. They do lectures in prison, they write books, they do poetry, they would have acquired a new skill, teaching each other. It's not that there is a prison library. Usually they're asking their friends to come and bring them books or some paper or something for writing, for drawing, in a parcel. And the parcel can be only taken 1 day a week, if they're lucky, because quite often people are moved from one prison to another, specifically to avoid that day, the only day a week, where they can receive the parcel. So anyway, a friend of mine, a university friend of mine that David read some of her work, and she's a philosopher, she's a feminist and a writer, and she's certainly the most like non-violent person I know. She is studying social transformation, amongst other things, and she wrote very interesting accounts about how she was arrested once for 15 days. 15 days is the usual term for everyone, just grabbed in the street. It doesn't have to be a good reason. It could be you're wearing wrong colors, the historical flag, white, red, and white. It could be that you are just in the wrong time at the wrong place. Maybe you are trying to get your comrades off the riot police. Anyway, people get arrested for not much at all, even if they were proverbially going out to get a pint of milk. No one listens. Yeah, it's just that it looks like they have to fill the plan. Anyway, so my friend, they were on the march, and she was going to every march with her husband, another philosopher, and he was grabbed because they initially were grabbing men. And then she didn't let go of his hand, so she had to follow into the police van. And they had to do 15 days in prison. Actually, no, he was released, funny enough, and she had to do 15 days. And then she wrote a real account about what was happening, how they had to sleep on cement floor and sleep on bottles of warm water for pillows. So lots of detail. But the amazing thing is, she said that people knew so much, and they would educate each other, just like back in the 30s. She would read lectures in philosophy, in epistemology, in art, and others would share what they know. And then when she was called out to interrogations, she absolutely threw everyone because they didn't know the first thing about what she does and what sort of philosopher she is and what she's standing for. But well, hopefully they got a bit educated as well. And had to think about it, because even in the riot police, there are some people who start thinking, right, no, I don't want to do that, and some of them come across to the side of the people and either resign or just trying to help people a bit. But most of them are really indoctrinated, and they are told to believe that everyone else who is not supporting the authority has to be treated like vermin and worse. It's quite shocking for the rest of us to find out how deep it was. It was like, yeah, it's a real cancerous growth. So now it's a really scary situation where it could shift so easily into a military dictatorship. Even if anything happens to Lukashenko, these people in black wearing balaclavas, obviously they're already bound by blood, and maybe their bosses will be able to run away. They'll have some money stashed away. But all the rank and file riot police, they wouldn't have anywhere to hide. Well, they're thinking, because obviously there isn't a law that they haven't broken. And it's interesting, as my friend Olga, just if I could quote from what she said later in an interview, about this violence. At the same time, people can be extremely dignified and suffer, carry on suffering, actually stand up really, really tall in the situation. And she said that overall violence as a form of treating people is not something new for the current Belarusian authority. For example, in October last year, Lukashenko said, and he was all dressed in military uniform, at some military polygon, he was criticizing the law on violence at home, stopping the violence at home. And he was saying, oh, it's okay to beat up children, it's good for them. And after that, it was like a real public response against that bill. So, and then he was basically linking the violence at home to violence in the army, bullying. And, a few people died in the army that was never investigated. And he was linking that to violence in the society as a whole. So, no, it's okay. Yeah, so if you agree to pass the bill on contravening violence at home, that means you pull out one of the chinks of the puzzle and the whole thing might collapse. Because the next thing people be thinking, all right, bullying in the army, that's also not good. It shouldn't be the standard. Bullying and violence at schools, in factories, etc., that's unacceptable. And then that means that the authority, their power is crumbling down. Yeah. So the views of the society on the violence as well, and how much bullying you can accept, they have shifted as well. big deal. So in a way, it's all things rolled into one, including emancipation, including many things. It's like the authority never expected that people would actually vote for 3 women that would vote for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the housewife. They were trying to sort of dish all the dirt on her, say, no, she's nothing, and let's register her as the presidential candidate. And they were amazed, or rather, everyone was surprised and amazed that people voted for her. Well, obviously, she's an incredibly strong person, and she's learning very fast. She's meeting heads of states. She is doing all she can to shift the situation, and together with the Coordination Council, and together with many people across the world, hopefully she'll make a positive difference as well. And she's called the leader of the nation, and we're assembled. Still, it's an incredible transformation of her as a person. At the same time, so it's not particularly secret that it's still very patriarchal in Belarus. And obviously there is a lot of language to do with patriarchy, and of course there is a big gap in salaries. So it's a lot of work to improve the situation of the women. Also a lot of work to improve the situation of the workers. As I already mentioned, it's pretty much semi-slave conditions. So you get the bosses, which are in Lukashenko's vertical, report to him, and they're very rich. And the workers, well, they haven't got many rights. So the independent trade unions are currently gaining ground despite a lot of pressure on them, a lot of oppression, and trying to stop any independent trade union movement. And yes, well, I'm using my phone, but on the phone I had a few good resolutions of various trade unions around the world. That's also good news. So IVF, BSI, and Industrial Union, to name but a few, that had very strong, very emotional resolutions in support of Belarus and in support of independent trade unions in Belarus. So yeah, sanctions, it could be something that might achieve the objective of actually shifting, stopping the money, closing the tap from which the salaries of the men in black of the riot police are being drawn. It's not just the riot police, it's people in plain clothes wearing balaclavas. You don't know who they are. They don't introduce themselves to you. They might be following you. They might be grabbing you in your own backyard, packing you away, and then putting a fake witness against you with a changed voice. And then, well, basically, it's not much you can change. You can hire a lawyer, but that doesn't change anything. So it's beyond lawlessness. And another thing that Roger mentioned, I think there were some connections with the anarchist book fair in London. And in this regard, I also wanted to mention one of Belarusian anarchists, Mykola Zadok, who urgently needs help and assistance. He was, even though he was hiding in Belarus, he was having his channel, quite popular, obviously, on resistance and bringing down the state, resisting the state. But he was tracked. People were obviously following him. So even in the secret location he was found, and he was tortured. He was beaten up, and then he was made to read something on the camera, and you can hear the person interrogating him with a changed voice, obviously very afraid of retribution. And he was saying, yes, my aim was to fight against the states, against the authority. Well, at the moment, he's certainly in a very precarious position in prison. We don't know how long he'll be kept. They kept him in prison before for lengthy periods. So I would say that we need to help Mykola Zadok, and if there is any anarchist connection in your ranks, maybe they should also be aware, and I'll be able to send information after this how to reach him. One can even send him postcards, at least that for support, and publicize the case. And he no doubt would be on the list of prisoners of conscience, of political prisoners. At the moment, we've got, I think, close to 200. I haven't checked the latest numbers of those officially admitted as prisoners of conscience, political prisoners, and certainly many more that could be technically on any offense. It could be called administrative and then suddenly changed into criminal. Goodness knows how it's done, but it doesn't matter. It's like a friend of mine, a philosopher, she was apparently called in on an administrative offense, imprisoned on a criminal offense, which was like, you know, thought up at the very last moment. And yes, there's a lot to be done. A lot to be done, even though with all the pushing, I feel we're getting somewhere. A lot to be done with the British Parliament. A lot of us have been writing to our MPs and getting, you know, very nice rubber-stamped polite answer. But I will send via Roger maybe a few points that we can ask our MPs and people that we are in touch with to push for. And hopefully we'll get somewhere on the part of the British government as well, not just the nice words and not much action. And one of the ideas that people think would certainly, you know, bring the victory sooner is switching off the SWIFT system, or at least getting the mandate for switching off SWIFT, obviously conditional on change of regime and people. Release of the prisoners and people getting the power, and to get rid of the incumbent imposter. I could talk and give you some more examples, but maybe you have seen something else on the news about Belarus. Maybe something made you think. Maybe you have questions of your own that you would like to ask. I will certainly be here to answer to the best of my ability, and send you more information if you need more specific information later.
Thank you, Elena. We, you know, it's a very difficult situation there, and thank you for your very important contribution. And I know at times it was very difficult for you to relay what is happening over there, but we appreciate that. Ian Drummond, Tina, can we make him into a panelist so he can ask a question? And also, can we get Roger as well? Ian, you are live now. So if you want to put your camera on.
So, sorry, comrades, that was quicker than I thought. I just raised hand right after the talk. Yeah, I've got a couple of things. First of all, I spoke with Elena at the organizing group meeting on Saturday. So hi again, and I'm glad we're having this full meeting now. I think it's going out on Facebook too, because I think it's a very important discussion. I think one of the things Labour Left Alliance can do specifically to help the cause is that we are quite an anti-imperialist wing within the Labour Party and the Labour Left. I think we should be getting the message out there to anti-imperialists that this isn't a repeat of Ukraine, which I must admit I was not a big supporter of, with the Maidan and all that a few years ago, where you had quite substantial far-right elements. And the thing that set it all off was that they didn't do a privatization supporting treaty with the European Union, and that was the trigger. The Euromaidan, and it was supported very much by the Americans as well, and has led to a war that's ongoing. Whereas in Belarus, it seems much more like a people's genuine movement than some of these color revolutions that have been going on around the world with American support in recent decades now. I'll put in the chat, actually, for some reason I get a lot of Russia Today suggestions on YouTube. I'm going to have to try and do something about that, especially since a couple of the latest have been explicitly pro-Trump. But I got a very interesting interview about a week ago described as a bloodthirsty interview with Putin's spokesman Peskov, where the interviewer was going quite hard on a couple of foreign policy things. One was Belarus. He was saying in a lot of Russians' opinions, this guy Lukashenko, he's been stiffing us for years. He's been playing us in the West against each other, which is actually a very good point that a lot of people don't get, that he isn't this kind of great anti-imperialist. He's been playing both sides, including the West, for a long time. So why is Putin so seemingly so much behind him? And the other issue you mentioned was the abandonment of Armenia, which is quite interesting in the Belarus context as well, because the uprising in Armenia a couple of years ago was seen as very similar to Belarus. It wasn't a color revolution. It wasn't pro-West or altering the country's geopolitics at the time in any way. But some people are thinking that maybe Russia didn't support that government against fascist aggression, in my opinion, from Azerbaijan and Turkey as much as it might have done if it had been the old regime rather than one brought in from the street in 2018. So my final question after all that, and it's very interesting, the stuff about social parasites and the kind of extreme right-wing neoliberal turn that Lukashenko's taken, because for a long time he seemed to be popular by maintaining some of the good things from the Soviet Union, a lot of free benefits and full employment rights in the old way, as well as some of the bad things of the old way, the dictatorship element. But I'd like to ask specifically how much COVID was a trigger for this, because it seems to me that that was the big trigger, that he was one of the really big COVIDiots in the world, along with the likes of Trump and Modi and their own Boris Johnson, and Bolsonaro, of course, in Brazil, all these strong men who've turned out to be the worst in the world at protecting their own people from the virus. So if you could say something about that as well, that would be very, very helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I can see you've been following the news. It's certainly a lot, a lot one can comment about. Yeah, I'll start from the end. COVID was definitely the trigger, because it was the very start, even before the election, it was the start of people self-organizing, and many myths of the, good old patriarchal dictator were completely debunked, because first thing, he insulted probably absolutely everyone possible under the sun over the years that he's been there, and things that he's been saying. But once he started insulting the dead or people who died from COVID, even though there could have been, even a doctor, a known doctor working with patients, someone else, really respected people. Lukashenko who said, well, you can't see, can you see the virus flying around? I can't, so it doesn't exist. So stop being stupid, stop spreading panic. That was his first response. And he started saying, oh, these people, one died because he was too fat, another one died because he was too old, and nothing to do with COVID. And anyway, it's their own fault. They died, they're dead. Anyway, people didn't like it. And they started organizing kind of self-imposed people quarantine. They started following what other countries are doing and saying, okay, let's just make some masks, let's do some social distancing. If people if they can work remotely, so they should, and obviously just clubbing together to get the medicine, to get the, what the patients needed, what people who had to isolate needed. So it really started, that kind of horizontal self-organization started. And that's something that the state is very much afraid of, because at the moment, all of that came out in people self-organizing in their yards. If you have like high rises, like say in big cities, you have this, it's like a well of high rises, and then people who live in that yard, usually under normal circumstances, they don't even say hello to each other, but they really got to know each other this summer. They do tea parties, they obviously make connections, and they go protest together, they help each other, to do with COVID, or if there's any other emergency, they just got together. One example in that regard, I just wanted to mention, recently, the latest tactic of the authorities to fight protesters is like create a ghetto. There was this area in Minsk, Novaya Borovaya is the name, which were actively supporting the protests, and that's where Werkmann was killed, not far from there. And so the way to stop them from being too protest-minded was to switch off their electricity and switch off their hot water, or all water, yeah. So that resulted in other districts queuing up to help. So they were absolutely loaded with barricades of water bottles, plug-in heaters, people were offering them to stay, to do the washing, whatever. And then the dictator, they actually saw that that's actually a huge mistake, because instead of shutting them up, they created this new way of, new wave of support for those people. But that's ridiculous, because it just makes me think again of the Minsk ghetto, when people would just be rounded up and, wire put around that, and they'll just have to fight for themselves without water or heat or electricity. So that was one example of incredible self-organization. And in terms of imperialism, one big worry, well, still remains, because of course Russia is a player, and we have to be very, very careful, very diplomatic, keeping the balance, because that it's not a color revolution. Belarus is not, certainly never had any imperialist ideas. It wants to keep independence, sovereignty. But I think it's only Lukashenko that wanted to go back into the empire. At some point he had this idea, which is why he was really suppressing Belarusian culture and language, and was saying to Putin, and he was at some point very popular in Russia. Those people who were particularly nostalgic about the Soviet Union, about the good things. And then after wild capitalism in the 90s in Russia, Belarus seemed to them from the other side to be relatively stable, relatively okay. Well, all I can say, it's all relative, because at the moment, technically education and medical care was free, but nothing is free. Because if you want something free, you basically have to know who to pay, where to buy your own medicine, where to pay your own PPE. Then you might be able to see a doctor who is on a salary, which is paid out of your taxes, a bit like NHS, except on the NHS, we actually get the medicine. And all the private business is severely suppressed, controlled, and it's a big risk. Anyone who is the usual joke, except amongst business people in Belarus, used to be that there are three kinds of business people in Belarus: the ones that have been behind bars, the ones that are behind bars, and the ones that still will be behind bars. That's the only difference. So it's that social parasite. It's effectively, it's one of ways of squeezing money out of population. There are many other ways. Another way of squeezing money is arresting you if you have a small business, however small. And then if you turn in 5 people, and sign something against them, they'll let you out. If you refuse to do that, they give you a lengthy sentence with full confiscation of everything you have, your business, your car, shirt off your back. And then you can enjoy yourself in prison for a few years and maybe make some uniforms for the riot police. Something else I wanted to mention, Armenia and Azerbaijan, that's another story, and very, very sad story. And I think it's quite a lot, obviously it's a very, very complex history, but also the fact that they've got neighbors. They've got Russia as a neighbor on one side and Turkey, and that nexus on the other side probably was fanning the tensions a bit more, because in that area, people lived together for centuries, they had mixed families, they had friends, and there wasn't any trouble. So it was like, or maybe artificially fanned, but I don't want to comment, because I really feel for them, and my heart really calls out, really feel for all my friends from both nations, and I hope it's going to be settled soon. But one thing for sure, Belarus doesn't want Russian peacemakers. And Mr. Peskov's comments, occasionally we try to read into Mr. Peskov's comments, looking for some hidden sense. And if he says, oh, the violence level in Belarus is unacceptable in his latest comment, what does it really mean? Does it mean that they're ready to change Lukashenko, replace him with someone else? So there's a lot of commentating about that. But effectively, well, Lukashenko was always playing both sides, Russia and the West, and the rhetoric would change depending on who's going to give him more money. And certainly all the oil money he borrowed from Putin in the way of oil price subsidies, etc., and other benefits, Putin is not going to see that repaid. The only way you can hope getting that repaid either in the form of assets or control. And that's, of course, is a big worry. But Lukashenko is certainly not, doesn't have any legal capacity, because everything he's doing, all the agreements he is promising to conclude, has concluded, they won't have any power, because he's not going to last. I just hope and pray that more people don't have to die for that to happen sooner.
Definitely. I think Tina would like to ask a question next. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, comrade, for this. Very interesting, because we don't actually hear about this very much in Britain. I wonder if you could explain why you think that is. Why is the media not reporting about this more? I found your I found this with the social parasite also quite troubling, and also are there actually enough jobs to go around that if you threaten people with a fee, that would imply that there are so many unfilled jobs that you have to have them filled. Concretely, I was wondering something like your comrades. You mentioned your philosopher friend. She wrote something about her ordeal in prison, and when they start studying and stuff, that's quite fascinating. It reminds me of course, Russia when there was a revolutionary situation in Russia over 100 years ago. Also, Ireland, political prisoners, etc. That's what they do. It would be quite good. Could we not translate something like this and put it out through our outlets? If we can help with that or something, I think that would be quite useful. Also, I found interesting your explanation just of the situation where he stands in terms of Russia and the West, because that I think is the key question, perhaps also to explain why there isn't so much media coverage. There is a question. I was involved in supporting trade unionists in Iran when they had their revolutionary movements recently, and of course there were some unions there who were basically, they were stuck between the theocracy on one side, and then the US was very interested in getting involved to have their own revolution from below and install, leaders that they can do business with, which a lot of working class people in Iran were not keen on either. So they were stuck between those two. So those two forces. Is it similar? Are there attempts perhaps as well by sort of more Western governments like the US to get involved in that and try to get in there? How is this playing out in terms of, because there were some trade unions then in Iran who took a lot of money from the US, and it came with political strings attached, and then lots of workers in Iran, turned their back on them, understandably so. Just wondering how that kind of thing is playing out in Belarus at the moment. But it's a fascinating account. I'm so glad you could join us, and I hope we can do more to spread news about this here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Yeah, I certainly will be able to post something from my friend Olga Sparaga. Some of her accounts also are available in German, and some have been translated into English, and I certainly will see if I can send a couple of good publications for further information. With regard to underreporting Belarus here, I feel that the situation, gosh, is a lot better than 10 years ago when 9 out of 10 presidential candidates were arrested in 2010, and we campaigned for years to let some of them out of prison, and some of them are still in prison. were let out and then rearrested preventively before this year's elections. And yeah, we've had to really push and push to get any attention, because yeah, money talks, and we were just simple people, maybe relatives of someone who was arrested, or maybe friends, and yeah, all we could offer was our time. And hopefully someone's here to listen and help promote the cause. And at the moment I see that there is something now and again at The Guardian, at The Independent, maybe a bit of Euronews, various angles, a bit of BBC Russian service, pretty good reporting, but not that much on the front pages. We made the front pages once. I think it was an absolutely massive march, September, October, when it was really, really big, and it just, all the papers in the world had the front page. But well, there's a lot of stuff happening in the world. Then of course it was just bumped up by other news, and as we all know, no news is good news. So usually there's still lots of horrible things happening around the world. In terms of influencing of various foreign players, you know, the US or someone else, well, there always will be someone who will be very prepared to come and take the money. Usually if you speak to independent trade union chaps in Belarus, they would say, oh, Lukashenko is accusing us all of being puppeteered from the West. Well, we're all puppeteers, but what's he called? Anyone who speaks a foreign language is a puppeteer. So many students of the foreign languages universities were arrested, and their teachers, and the best teacher of Italian in the country. Well, because obviously they're puppeteers, they speak to someone in the West, and they probably, you know, spread the wrong information about Belarus. Very disadvantageous. So let's just either squeeze them out of the country or let them, you know, cool down in prison. And again, in the US, at the moment, I think everyone who wants a change in Belarus, they will be knocking on all doors in whichever way possible. They will speak to someone in the US, and someone in Australia, and someone in Africa, and someone in Scandinavian countries, anywhere. Yeah, UK, Ireland, just really grateful to all the friends who actually listen and want to do something to help. So at the moment it was a real awakening. Lots of people in the diaspora. I had no idea there were so many people connected with Belarus everywhere. A lot of them would just kind of melt into the background. They'll be speaking English, Russian, Italian, something else, and they kind of become one of those good hardworking professionals, kind of in their own walk of life. But you wouldn't necessarily know they have a Belarus connection, but they all suddenly came out of the woodwork, and because they saw, well, we've passed the point of no return. That was the myth we had. Now we know what the reality is, and we know what grim reality we might face if we just stop now. So that was very impressive. In terms of money, well, trade unions, independent trade unions can't accept money in Belarus. Everything is stopped at the border. It's very difficult. So one has to kind of have direct contact with activists, and the authorities quite recently, they blocked bank accounts of several people that received help, simply financial help, like help in paying their fines, or compensation for victims, or compensation for striking workers. So the funds, they're helping them, they're looking for other avenues, because obviously what was done was illegal. It's like stealing from your bank account. You've done nothing wrong. And it wasn't even, there were not even small amounts, but just the whole principle. And because it was done so obviously across the board, that was just horrible. And striking workers, well, we just find a way to organize and help them. Help the families. We have the system of adopting a family, so you can actually be buddied up with the family and order food for them on the internet. Because obviously if a worker is fired, they haven't got a big cushion financially at all, and they also will be fined possibly. Yeah, and then sent a bill for their stay in prison. It could be various threats, intimidations, and fines are usually It's X number, X time your basic salary. So say, for argument's sake, you'll get £100 a month, then you could be fined up to 20 times £100 a month. And for you, you would have to sell your house and, beg, borrow and steal to get that money. But obviously, that sort of money for fines has to be raised through help. Anyone who cares chips in into those charity funds, or directly helps if people have someone that they know and they can help directly. So help is always at hand. It's one thing which is very difficult, but I found very difficult lately. A lot of people asking me whether I or someone else knows psychologists who work with trauma victims, with people who've been tortured, beaten, who had very harrowing experiences. And that's, again, it's Europe, it's a European country, 21st century. It's not a declared war. It's effectively a dictator trying to start a civil war. Yeah, so the psychologists were at short supply. They're all very, very busy. And they themselves, after giving therapy, they have to receive therapy. That's the rule, because it's hard going. Yeah. And volunteers that run the media outlets as well. I mean, I chip in, do my humble contribution at one of the media centers. They're all run by people just setting aside their time and providing whatever skills they have to organize that, to make sure the news gets out and information gets out when the main news subsides. So our latest thing was a campaign of a letter I might pass on to Roger. We all wrote our MPs and wrote all the Belarusian diaspora organizations in the UK, wrote a joint letter to Dominic Raab asking for more sanctions, tougher sanctions, amongst other things.
Okay, Elena, thank you for that. We'll go to Ken next, followed by David and then Ed, and then Roger to help us with the motion as well. Ken?
Hello, thank you, Elena, for your talk and for continuing to keep us informed of what's happening in Belarus. You mentioned that the regime is blocking routes for demonstrations, and that's something it's done for some considerable time now. There was talk of perhaps those opposing the regime getting drivers to organize to sort of set up alternative routes, or perhaps block the regime from blocking the demonstrations. Has anything come of that?
Oh yeah, it keeps happening. So there is this dedicated Telegram channel for drivers who care, and they do it in many ways. The bravest ones, they actually block the police vans. They create traffic jams when the police vans are trying to encircle any column of people marching, or block the route for the march, or just stop in order to grab some people and pack them in. The drivers might not necessarily be brave or knowing that your car is going to be totaled, because after after every demonstration, the men in black, they just jump out and they try. You might have seen some videos when they just smash your windscreen, or they beat you up and arrest you and take your car away, etc. So one has to have some guts and be able to slam on the brake and get away. There was some amazing video of another driver of Yandex taxi service helping a protester escape. You might have seen that in the video. That was like something out of James Bond chase. So there's men in black are trying to bash the car, trying to grab the protester. The protester gets in the taxi, drives off, and that was like a proper chase. And after that, the taxi company had so much custom. They were real heroes. Of course, the guy is a hero. Of course, he has to be careful, but that was all done. So lots of drivers, not necessarily even taxi drivers, they provide like a taxi and home delivery service to those marching, to the pensioners, because every Monday people, you know, who are retired, older people, some in their 80s and 90s, they all go on their own march, and it's called March of Wisdom. It's every Monday. And then a lot of people get organized to pick them up and bring them home on the end of the route or somewhere else. So they kind of provide the makeshift ambulance service, makeshift delivery service, helping in whichever way they can. So quite often people who've got a car and some time to spare, they can help other protesters, either to take them somewhere safe or to deliver some supplies, or last thing, of course, they had to deliver supplies to all the people that were left without water and electricity for a few days in a massive district in the city. So drivers are doing their bit.
Thank you.
And of course they're honking, of course they're beeping every time there is a march. They're certainly showing their appreciation.
They're certainly there in spirit. David? Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Well, look, first of all, greetings to everyone in LLA. And, thanks for this opportunity. And thanks also for Elena. Sometimes I could see you struggle to deal with it and to put it in an objective and somewhat dispassionate way, because there are emotions here, and those are fully respected. Thanks so much. Can I say, I'm a South African trade unionist, a socialist, and I've also been detained in maximum security prison. So, I share some of the common experiences that Olga, presents there too. The other commonalities I see in the struggle too. For instance, none of the Western imperialist countries could say that they sympathized with apartheid. Of course they didn't. They would never make a statement like that. In fact, they would even say they were opposed to it. Marvelous. You had to smile when you saw those headlines. Thatcher was for freedom. She even said, she was in favor of changing things. That is the limp hand of support that the EU, the West, the imperialists are offering to people in Belarus who are struggling for freedom. A limp hand and no actual support. Maybe a token thing, and a token that's even Thatcher had to have some sanctions against apartheid. So you do make the right token gestures, but nothing of substance. And that's why it's so important that Labour gets the cry for help, the cry for solidarity from the Belarus workers right, and that we come on stream and give them all our full support. Because as in South Africa, which is the center of struggle throughout Africa, that freedom would actually bring freedom for the whole of those countries in Eastern Europe, which are somewhere between democracy and dictatorship, or actually in dictatorship, and Russia itself, where we see workers are under something similar of the labor code. Can I say that as a South African trade unionist, I've understood what it means to organize a strike. And in law, it's actually more difficult in Belarus than under apartheid, at least on paper, to organize a strike. But more so, this is the other side of it, is that there are official trade unions, there are compulsory state yellow trade unions that you have to join or you don't have a job. And those are aligned against the democratic independent trade unions. So when there have been strikes, as there been a general strike recently, those workers who are trying to organize independent unions are the first to be fired. And they're fired in this way, apparently, this was what I understand, is that the yellow unions are there as a kind of jury. They are, what do you say? I'm not quite sure how you put it, but evidence will be presented of videos that you were on strike, of statements by common workers, but those will be, a distorted voice. and all that be presented to you, and then the official union sign off on this, that you're fired. Immediately then you have to pay back all your loans. Any loans you have to have that you've got through the union, through the official yellow union, have to be paid back immediately. You then are in the status where you're going to lose your house, and you then have to worry about your children's getting education, healthcare, and so forth. Because in some ways, the laws are more of a fascist state. It's you know, than any pseudo-socialist state, despite the fact of elements of you know, a planned economy by one man. That's the way it is. And so, you know, workers are really appealing for support now. And, you know, and again, I found somewhat similar, you know, in the past, the TUC and, you know, in Britain would give sort of token support, you know, to workers' struggle in South Africa. I had to organize a demonstration to force the TUC, when they visited South Africa, to meet with black trade unions. I mean, it's that kind of solidarity. You have to squeeze them and actually force them to nod in the right direction, and then to open up their pockets to give you maybe $10 if you're lucky, £10 if you're lucky. I mean, that's the extent of the solidarity. We know that British workers want to do much more. We knew the same in Britain too, and we struggled when I was in Britain then. We struggled and we got support from Oxford Cowley, you know, from the workers who are making Land Rovers in Solihull. This report came in loud and clear and strong. And that was the support that striking workers in South Africa got during the struggle. And we look forward to seeing the same level of struggle, you know, there. Just one last point in relation to the media. As you see, there's very little said there, because actually there's not much which is actually in the Western interest, you know, to report on Belarus. You know, the EU is not too keen to engage with Putin. This is a popular uprising. If it happens and succeeds in Belarus, what's going to happen in Poland possibly, or in Lithuania, or in all those little pseudo-states that are dotted around in Russia? And then you would have something called destabilization, which the bourgeois definitely don't approve of. And that's why, I don't know if you know, but Costa Rica has had a general strike for 2 weeks against a neoliberal IMF imposed budget. And in the end, they succeeded. Does anyone know about it? It's not in The Guardian. I haven't seen it anywhere else, because I follow The Guardian every so often. And I only heard of it by chance, actually, on the BBC, which is not usually a supporter of general strikes. And that's how you pick it up in different ways. So the working class internationally is always picking up only little bits and pieces of information about what's happening in the other parts of the world. And that's why I want to pay a tribute to Olga, well, certainly to Olga, and also to Elena, who's doing a fantastic job in developing solidarity. Where we can, let's go deep into our unions, explain what's happening in relation to Belarus, respond to appeals. We're getting appeals which are secret appeals, because people can't put their names to some of these, but it's going ahead, and they're desperate for support. Imagine you are now declared a social parasite. You're virtually out on the streets. Your kids can't get to school and to education, and then you're struggling in this way. Or are you going to go into exile to Poland, which is possible, or can you try and struggle in your own state? So solidarity is absolutely essential. And I'd like to thank LLA for organizing this, this discussion, you know, so that we can discuss just what is needed. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David. Elena?
Yes, David, thank you so much. Thank you, comrades. That was very good to hear your questions, your opinions, and the parallels with struggle in other countries around the world, including South Africa. It's always very inspiring. And I was absolutely amazed. It's mind-blowing how much the networks and solidarity works across the world, despite the media maybe not getting the nice picture and not putting it on the front page. Yes, it was a big peaceful protest in Belarus. The picture was pretty. It was like a carnival. It looked good. But once the violence started really cranking up, you know, there's only so much violent videos and information that people can take. It is scary, it is tiring, the weather turns bleak and grey, and it doesn't make a nice picture. So it's all about people, it's about human stories, and someone somewhere has been through it before, which is what we learned. People in the Polish Solidarność movement have been through it before. We can learn from them. We can learn from Ireland, South Africa, from the workers in the UK, Costa Rica. Indeed, those who followed it must have known that the general strike was going on. In Belarus, the strike still continues. More enterprises are joining, and people were very moved. It was emotionally very hard and moving, and many people, after the death of the killing of Roman Bondarenko, decided to join the strike and just pull out all the stops. So it's still there, we're still fighting on, and we're very grateful for all the solidarity and support, and do spread the word. And thank you for helping to fly the flag for Belarus. Thank you for your support, comments.
You're welcome. We'll move on to Ed, and then after Ed, Roger will come on and say a few words, and then he can put forward the motion that we will pass. Ed, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, can I echo what David just said, to thank Elena for the brave testimony that you've given, and the, despite all the horrors of the situation, the fantastically inspiring stories that you're able to tell about, this this person who's being arrested, being able to escape in a taxi, and the solidarity of communities within the blocks, the tower blocks, where people have begun talking to each other. I can see that there, despite all the adversity, there is a tremendous community feeling and the spirit of resistance that is growing. And that, of course, is what worries the regime most of all. I just wanted to say a few words about this question of why we don't hear about this in the UK, and to connect it with the way these movements have developed. I mean, Ian mentioned the Maidan in the Ukraine. All these movements, when they first come into existence, they consist of people whose political ideas haven't fully developed. They want some basic things like freedom, democracy, a chance to have a more stable and well-paid employment, and they don't have all the sort of elaborate political constructions that come with a more developed movement as the struggle matures. Now, I think it was noticeable with the very beginning of this movement in Belarus that for the first couple of weeks, the Western media gave it more coverage than they do now. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is because it appeared on the face of it that this was an opportunity for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya to push out Lukashenko, and that we would have, from Angela Merkel's point of view, we would have a new regime in Belarus that would be more compliant with the EU, perhaps more inclined to do deals with the EU, and that from the West's point of view, it was one more opportunity to build their empire, to build their sphere of influence. It was when the Belarusian working class, as an organized class, began to organize strikes, and it became clear that this could go a lot further than a simple liberal democratic change that would benefit the EU. It was when that happened that the media began to quieten down on all these stories. We don't know what the outcome of this movement will be, but it looks from what Elena is saying, of course, that Lukashenko's got a very rough ride ahead of him, and it may end up like Romania. It may end up with a dictator holding on till the last minute, and then, you know, being finally pushed out in some kind of bloody reckoning. But in Poland in the 1980s, there are some interesting parallels that can give us insight into this situation. When the Polish workers began to organize their free trade union, Solidarność, in the summer of 1980, it grew very rapidly to a union of about 10 million workers in the space of 2 weeks. And very quickly, it transformed itself from calling itself a union into effectively being a political party, an opposition party under a regime that was still a dictatorship. And most of the workers involved in that union did not for a moment consider that the political objective of this movement was to re-establish capitalism in Poland. Most of the workers in that union, their aim, their aspiration was for, within the framework of a planned economy, of a state-owned economy, that there should be workers' control and management of industry. And it was only when the old regime collapsed at the end of the 1980s and Western banks piled in to Poland to offer, inverted commas, assistance, that the new Polish regime came under pressure and succumbed to the pressure that in order to get some kind of economic stability and a new start, they would go along with a huge program of privatization. Now, those conditions, the conditions that pertained in Poland at the end of the 1980s, when capitalism still had quite a bit of life in the West, there'd been consumer booms, there was all kinds of prospect of economic growth for a while under capitalism. Those conditions do not pertain in Belarus or Eastern Europe at the moment. That since 2008, it's been manifestly clear to anyone who considers it that capitalism is not a very good option. And therefore, the risks for the West of kind of backing this are far, far greater, because this, and this is the significance for us, for the Labour Left Alliance, for the Labour Party, for socialists all over the world. Because if this movement turns into a struggle for workers' democracy within the framework of a socially owned economy, then it will be a change that represents a possible future for the whole of humanity across the world. And that is why, in my opinion, there's been such a silence about it since the working class really became the key player in this movement way back in August. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. I'll have a very quick comment.
Thank you,
yes.
Ed.
It's very crucial
yes, Elena?
that the independent trade unions get strong in Belarus now. And of course, this is what the authorities are afraid of, which is why they're hunting down activists, hunting down members of the strike committee, and trying to stop anyone who's at strike. In prison, they are forced to sign the resignation, and all kinds of pressure is applied. They're threatened with their children being taken away into care. They're threatened with, having to repay lots of money for all their loans and everything they have, the place they live in. So there's a lot, certainly there's a big financial component of pressure and psychological component as well. The workers are being told, well, you're nothing, we'll fire you, will be absolutely nothing, you'll never find another job, we'll just import, this is not a very politically correct statement, but that was actually something that the yellow trade union bosses said, look, you're going to be all disposed of and we'll bring about 3 million Chinese to take your place. So make your mind now, either you work and you work as a slave, under the batons of the riot police, or shut up and get out. And so it's certainly a very, very tough situation to be brave enough and think about your family and still go on strike in Belarus now. But the independent trade unions, just like in Poland, this is their chance. And they will make sure there are social guarantees that with the change of the regime, the workers, the places will be protected, workers' rights will be protected, workers actually will understand what it is to have rights that you can use, including the right to strike and proper contract, proper global compact, and being actually in touch with the best international practices and trade unions, with the solidarity and learning from each other. So all of that, in some way, one thing I wanted to mention, Belarus was always a bit of an experiment, and for the most part, it was a lot of positivity. In the Soviet Union, back in the day, it was one of the most, I should put, affluent republics. Was very high level of education, good industry, blue collar, white collar, intellectual level was very good, good universities, so can't complain. But once, obviously with the free market, we had a bit of a spread out lending. We didn't have the sudden wild capitalism of the 90s, didn't have what happened in Russia or Ukraine. The only oligarch that was allowed to stay was, of course, Lukashenko himself and his cronies, and he would change them from time to time in case some of them become a bit too rich and powerful and want to budge him away. And one big worry is that, of course, the men in black have felt their power. They quite like being able to control people and beat them up as they please and take their money. That's a big worry. Certainly shifting into military junta, into a dictatorship, it's even scary prospect if there could be one. And that can happen very quickly. So I do hope that we obviously are prepared, even when the pretty picture is gone, even if Mrs. Merkel understands that it's not going to be so easy for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. We will just have to keep plugging away and doing our bit in the trenches. It's not just about the picture and interviews and saying the right words, and some specific support and some specific gritty work. Where we are is what we are now doing at the moment, and if it means spreading information or sharing experience, that's also very important. I just wanted to thank you all one more time.
You're welcome, Elena. Roger will now say a few words, and then he will also move a motion that we have drafted. Okay, Roger, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to start again, like some other comrades, in complimenting Elena on the amazing work she's done from the very beginning of this movement, in bringing this to the attention of all of us. We were very, very happy. We in WIN, the Workers' International Network, we've hosted 3 or 4 meetings in this period, in which Elena has introduced us to strike leaders, to people straight off the Sunday demonstrations in the streets, people who are just out of prison, people who've been beaten up by Lukashenko's thugs, and so on. And we've had the opportunity to discuss with them and to engage with them, and we're in day-by-day contact with them, and we're very happy to do everything we can to give solidarity and support. I would like to say, therefore, first of all, to compliment the Belarus workers on their incredible heroism and stamina in keeping up this struggle against such utter brutality and such overwhelming odds. And we have to remember, this is not like many of the movements that we've seen around the old Stalinist empire and so on. This is particularly a movement based, as comrades have said, on industrial workers. It's a movement of miners, steel workers, engineering workers, as well as teachers and other sections of the working class. And above all, it's such a sustained movement. I mean, we could compare it. It's the biggest movement in Europe, I would say, perhaps since France 1968, or we could say Romania in 1989, or the 50 general strikes that we saw in Greece in the course of the early part of the millennium. I mean, there has been, it's something right up there, but it's more sustained, and that's what I think we should recognize. It shows these Belarus workers are not going to knuckle down easily. They're fighting it right to the very last. Why has it received so little kind of solidarity in the West? There is this suspicion that somehow, you know, this is the former Stalinist empire. Is this imperialism trying to make inroads? Is it the EU trying to nibble away bits of what's left of the surrounding area around Russia and so on? And first of all, we have to say it's nothing like the colour revolutions for the reasons that comrades have said, and for the reasons that I've said, that it's a proletarian uprising, it's general strikes, it's a movement of very, very firmly and clearly of the working class against slave conditions. But also, let's also remember, some people are a little bit you know, have a delayed reaction to the events of the last couple of decades, that we are talking now, not of a, well, 3 decades actually. We're not talking about Russia as it was. Russia at the moment, we must bear in mind, Russia has had a counter-revolution. Putin and the people in charge in Russia are the butchers of the Russian Revolution. Putin is the kind of godfather of reaction around the world. He plays the same kind of role that the Tsar did in the late 19th century in sustaining all the ultra-reactionary movements around the world. And let's say, first of all, we have no sympathy with either side. We have no preference between these two powers. But why is it that the capitalist class, that the West, actually have not tried to exploit this situation? I think, as other comrades have said, I think there are 2 factors. One is, despite all their talk, they do not want to tangle with Putin. For instance, when Putin annexed Crimea, there was a little bit of tut-tutting and crocodile tears, but there was no real attempt by Western imperialism to try to intervene in that, and in many other cases too, Georgia too. But above all, what motivates the ruling class in the West, above all in relation to Belarus, is the fear of contagion. They want to see Lukashenko and Putin crush this revolution. They're terrified that it would spread, as comrades have said, to Poland and maybe Hungary and other places which are now firmly in the grip of quite reactionary dictatorships, but are smouldering, are beginning to the ground is beginning to shake, particularly in Poland, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks. They want to see this movement put down because the world is trembling on the brink. We talked about it in the chat, but I mean, we're seeing every day practically, we see news of a new uprising, of a new government being overthrown, of new movements on every continent, throughout Latin America, throughout Africa, in many countries in Asia, and Belarus is the standard bearer or the vanguard of a movement that is definitely we're on the brink of seeing explode in Europe too. We have drafted a model resolution, and I really want to end on that point. I hope comrades have the text of the resolution. But it's our duty to the heroes of the Belarus working class to organize solidarity, to spread news, to appeal for support, to collect funding, although despite all the difficulties in getting funding through. And we have to, you know, it's their struggle, it's our struggle, and we have to do everything we can. If they are defeated, and I don't think they will be, but if they are defeated, that will throw the movement back for maybe for some years in Eastern Europe and in Europe as a whole. We have to show the utmost solidarity and political support above all to their struggle.
Okay, Roger, thank you for that. Roger, do you want to read out the model resolution and then we'll go on a simple show of hands?
Tasib, it's in the chat, and I don't think really it's a decision-making meeting. I think we've got it on our website, so comrades can use it.
Right, it's in the
Yes,
chat.
yes.
I've put it in the chat.
Brilliant. If comrades can have a quick read of that. Okay, I think most of us would have read through that. Roger, Roger, do you have it in front of you? Sorry, Roger, you've gone on mute. If you want to unmute yourself, Roger.
Myself. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, we can. Yeah, the only thing I would add to it is where it says violation, we should make that into the plural, violations. And I think the rest of it's fine.
I've nothing, no problem with that.
Right, so it looks like, so can I then, if there isn't anybody who's against it, that means we're all for it. Excellent, so we can say that we support this resolution fully, the people that are here today. Okay, Elena, do you want to say a few last sort of words and then we'll conclude today's webinar?
Thank you, comrades. Thank you all who attended the webinar and invited me to speak. I always feel inadequate because I want to say so much for those who at the moment have no voice, no opportunity even to speak to their families, not even through solicitors sometimes, for all those that already lost their lives in this struggle, for all those who have been beaten and tortured and need to recover and need support, for all those who are not expecting, hoping that their loved ones will come home in a couple of days, in 2 weeks, whenever, and hopefully earlier. Hopefully the regime will go down sooner than their sentences will run out. But we still have a lot of work to do, and I really feel all the solidarity is giving us extra strength, extra support, more ideas, and we just have to keep on. And I just wanted to say the people in Belarus are always very grateful. They never forget their true friends. And some of these friendships is something that we make and keep for life, including in the trade union movement, in the labor movement. And I do hope to, yes, to send more information to you and to stay in touch with you and carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. We really appreciate you giving your time today and sharing at times very emotional stuff with us. And obviously it's taken a lot out of you. We thank comrade Roger for organizing this. He was the one who actually suggested this. And without Tina's help, I don't think any of this would have formulated in today's session. So I'd like to thank you, everyone that is watching this webinar through Zoom and Facebook. Please look at our Facebook page. We have links there to other webinars and other activities that we are actively involved in. And please join us if you can. We have local groups, regional groups, and interest groups as well. And people are more than welcome to come and join us and participate in our activities, etc. So for this evening, Elena, thank you. Thank you, Roger and Tina and everybody else that has been watching us. Thank you and have a good evening.